Victoria Sterling slammed her fist on the boardroom table so hard that the coffee cups jumped, and 11 of the most powerful men in the company flinched like schoolboys. "Get out," she said. "All of you. Now!" They scrambled for the door, all except one. Ryan Carter, the tired single father from the third floor, stayed in his chair and quietly said, "You're shaking." Nobody had ever noticed that before. And nobody knew that 6 hours later this cold billionaire would take Ryan's hand and lead him without a single word toward a locked bedroom door she had not opened in 7 years. What was behind that door would change both their lives forever. Before we begin, comment below and tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. And if you believe two broken people can still find each other, subscribe and follow the channel now because you won't want to miss how this ends. Ryan Carter woke up at 4:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before his alarm, the way he had woken up every morning for the last 4 years. He didn't reach for the alarm. He reached for the empty side of the bed the way a man reaches for a step that isn't there, and his hand landed flat on the cold sheet, and he pulled it back the way he always did. Then he lay in the dark and counted the ceiling tiles he couldn't see, and he told himself the same thing he told himself every morning. "Get up, Ryan. She needs you up." She was Emma, 7 years old, down the hall asleep with one arm hanging off the mattress and a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons under her chin, the same rabbit her mother had given her before her mother stopped being able to give anyone anything. Ryan got up. He didn't turn on the big light because the big light hurt his eyes and made the apartment look as small as it actually was. He used the little light over the stove. He put water on. He cracked 2 eggs into a bowl and beat them with a fork. And while he beat them, he listened to the building wake up around him, the pipes knocking the neighbor above, running his shower a truck downshifting somewhere out on the avenue. He was 35 years old, and he could count on one hand the number of people who knew the truth about his life. The truth was this: Ryan Carter was drowning, and he was very, very good at smiling while he did it. "Daddy!" He turned. Emma was standing in the kitchen doorway, in her dinosaur pajamas, her hair a wild brown cloud, rubbing one eye with her fist. "Hey, Bug," he said. "You're up early." "I heard the eggs." "You heard the eggs?" He laughed low so he wouldn't wake anybody through the thin walls. "You've got ears like a bat." "Bats are blind." "Bats are not blind, that's a myth, come sit down." She climbed onto the stool at the counter, and he slid the plate in front of her, and for 1 minute, one whole minute, everything in Ryan Carter's world was exactly the way it should be. His daughter eating eggs, the little light over the stove, the gray edge of morning coming up in the window. Then Emma said, "Is today the day you get the money?" Ryan stopped wiping the counter. "What money, baby?" "The money you talked about on the phone. To Grandma. You said if you got it we could stay." Ryan set down the rag. He came around the counter and crouched so he was eye level with her, the way his own father had never once done with him. "Emma, look at me. You don't ever have to worry about grown-up money. That's my job. Worrying about that is my whole entire job. Okay? Your job is eggs and school and being 7. Deal." "Deal." She chewed, then small. "But are we going to have to move again?" And there it was. The thing that lived in Ryan's chest like a second heartbeat. The thing that never fully went to sleep. They had moved twice in 4 years. Once when the medical bills came in and swallowed the house. Once when the first apartment got too expensive, after the hospital sent the second round of bills, the ones that came after his wife was already gone, the ones addressed to a woman who no longer existed. Ryan had learned that grief does not stop the mail. "We're not moving," he said. "Not this time. I promise you." He had no business making that promise. He knew it the second it left his mouth, but he made it anyway because that's what you do. You look your kid in the eye, and you lie a little bit, and then you go out into the world and you try like hell to make the lie come true. The company was called Sterling Holdings, and it took up 11 floors of a glass tower downtown, and Ryan Carter had worked there as a senior project manager for 2 years and 4 months. He dropped Emma at school at 7:50, waited at the curb until he saw her walk through the doors, the way he always did, Because a man does not drive away until he sees the doors close behind his child. And then he fought traffic for 40 minutes and rode the elevator up to the 14th floor, and he put on the face. The face was important. The face said, "I've got it handled." The face said, "Nothing's wrong here." The face was the most valuable thing Ryan owned, and he'd built it one crack at a time. Carter. Dev Malhotra fell into step beside him in the hallway, holding 2 coffees, handing one over. Dev was the closest thing Ryan had to a friend in the building, a data analyst 40, divorced funny in the dry way that gets you through a bad Monday. "You look like death." "Thank you. I moisturize." "You hear the news." "What news?" Dev lowered his voice. "Whitmore-Sterling merger fell apart last night. Whole thing's dead. Sterling's been in the boardroom since 6 a.m. screaming at the finance guys." He took a sip. "I heard she made Prakash cry." "Prakash cries at commercials." "Not the point. The point is, stay off the 14th floor today, my friend. Dragon's out of the cave." Ryan didn't say anything. He just drank his coffee and thought the way he'd been thinking for a while, now that everyone in the building had a nickname for Victoria Sterling, and not one of them had ever really looked at her. Because Ryan had looked. You couldn't help it if you paid attention, and paying attention was the only thing Ryan had left. He'd noticed things. He'd noticed that Victoria Sterling arrived before everyone and left after everyone, and that in 2 years, he had never once heard her mention a husband, a boyfriend, a friend, a vacation, a Saturday. He'd noticed that she never ate lunch with anyone. He'd noticed that on certain days, he couldn't figure out the pattern of them. She came in with her eyes red-rimmed and her voice a half-tone lower, and on those days, she was crueler than usual, and everyone hated her a little more, and nobody once asked if she was all right. He'd noticed that her office light was on at 9, 10, 11 at night, long after the cleaners had come and gone. Ryan had noticed because Ryan knew what it looked like when a person built a fortress out of work, so they wouldn't have to go home to an empty room. He was living in one himself. Doug. At 11:20 that morning, Ryan got the email that started it. It came from HR. Subject line, "Confidential, please review." He opened it, and his coffee turned to acid in his stomach. Restructuring. Cost reduction. The project management division was being consolidated. Effective end of Q4 senior positions were being eliminated. His name was on the list. Ryan read it 3 times. Then he sat very still, and he did the math he had already done 100 times in his head. And the math was the same as it always was. Rent. Emma's after-school program. The last of the medical debt he was still paying down at $58 a month, a payment he'd never once missed, because missing it felt like abandoning her all over again. Groceries, the car payment, the health insurance that ran through this job, the health insurance that covered Emma's asthma inhaler, which cost without insurance more than he could say out loud without his hands going cold. 6 weeks. He had 6 weeks. "Carter." A voice behind him. He turned. It was Marcus Webb, the finance director, one of the 11 men who'd been in the boardroom that morning, a man with a golf tan and a handshake like a wet towel. "You get the email." "I got the email." "Rough break." Webb didn't sound like he thought it was a rough break. "Listen, between us, the list isn't final. Sterling signs off end of the week. If you were smart, you'd make yourself real useful the next few days. Somebody in your spot with a kid at home." He clicked his tongue. "I'd be kissing some ring is all I'm saying." And he walked off, and Ryan sat there with his hands flat on his desk, breathing. Kissing some ring. Ryan Carter had never kissed a ring in his life. He'd never asked anyone for anything. He'd sold his wife's car himself in the parking lot of a diner to a stranger with cash, rather than tell his own mother he needed help. He'd worn the same 3 suits for 2 years. He'd eaten dinner as not hungry more nights than he'd admit so Emma wouldn't go without seconds. Pride was the last thing he had that hadn't been taken from him. But pride doesn't fill an inhaler. The rest of the day, Ryan did what he always did. He worked. He worked because working was the only thing that turned the noise in his head down to a manageable volume. He cleared his queue. He answered 40 emails. He helped a junior analyst named Grace fix a formatting error in a report that was due at 5, staying 20 minutes past when he could have left because Grace was 24 and terrified and reminded him of the person he'd been before life sanded him down. "You didn't have to do that," Grace said when it was fixed. "Yeah, I did," Ryan said. "It's fine. Go home." And at 6:40, when the floor had emptied out and the cleaners were starting their rounds, Ryan went looking for the 14th floor break room to wash out his coffee mug before he drove home, and that's where he found her. Victoria Sterling was sitting alone at the little round table in the corner in the harsh overhead light, still in her charcoal suit, and she was staring at her phone, with an expression on her face that Ryan Carter would remember for the rest of his life. Because it wasn't the dragon. It wasn't the boardroom. It wasn't the woman who'd made Prakash cry. It was the face of a person who has just been hit somewhere that doesn't leave a mark. Her jaw was tight, her eyes were wet and furious at being wet. Her thumb was hovering over the phone screen, and she wasn't moving. She was just looking at it the way you look at a photograph of someone who isn't coming back. Ryan should have walked away. Every rule of the building said, walk away. She was the most powerful person in a 5-mile radius, and she was about to sign a piece of paper with his name on it. And the smart thing, the Marcus Webb thing, was to back quietly out of the doorway and pretend he'd seen nothing. Instead, Ryan Carter did the thing that had gotten him into and out of trouble his whole life. He told the truth. "You look like somebody who could use a worse cup of coffee than the one you've got," he said. Victoria's head came up fast. Her expression slammed shut, like a door the mask went back on so quickly it was almost frightening to watch, like seeing a wound close over. "This is the executive break room," she said. Her voice was ice. "Employees use the one on 12. "I know. I'm washing a mug. I'll be 30 seconds. He walked to the sink. He did not hurry. He rinsed his mug, and while he did it, he said without turning around, "For what it's worth, everybody thinks the merger falling through is going to sink us. It's not. That deal was rotten. Whitmore's people cooked the last 2 quarters. Everybody in project management could see it. We just weren't allowed to say so." Silence behind him. Then coldly, "And how would a project manager know that?" "Because a project manager reads the actual documents instead of the summaries the finance department writes to make themselves look good." He shut off the water and turned around, drying the mug with a paper towel. "You dodged a bullet last night, Ms. Sterling. You're gonna get told for a month that you failed. You didn't. You just made the finance guys look like fools, and they're never gonna forgive you for it. That's what today's really about." Victoria Sterling stared at him. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and Ryan watched something move behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the specific loneliness of a person who has been surrounded by liars for so long that a single true sentence lands like a slap. "What's your name?" she said finally. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. "Ryan Carter, Project Management, 14th floor well." He gave a short, tired laugh. "14th floor for another 6 weeks. You're on the restructuring list." "You'd know better than me. You're the one signing it." He hadn't meant it to come out sharp. It came out sharp anyway because he was tired, and he was scared, and he was standing in front of the person who held his daughter's asthma medication in the palm of her hand, and didn't know it, and wouldn't care if she did. And the second he said it, he braced for it. The cold, the dismissal, the "you're done. Mr. Carter, security will walk you out." It didn't come. Instead, Victoria Sterling looked at him for another second, and then she looked back down at her phone, and something in her seemed to just give out. The tightness in her jaw broke. Her shoulders came down half an inch, and she said very quietly in a voice that didn't belong to the CEO at all, "Do you have somewhere to be, Mr. Carter? I have to pick up my daughter at 7:15 from after school." A daughter. She said it strangely, like the word had a splinter in it. "Right. Emma. She's 7. And her mother—" Ryan set the mug down on the counter. He'd been asked this question maybe 200 times in 4 years, and he still hadn't found a good way to answer it, so he answered it the only way he had. There's no mother anymore. It's just us." The words fell into the room and sat there. Victoria Sterling looked up at him again, and for the first time, the ice was entirely gone. What was underneath it wasn't warmth exactly. It was recognition. It was the look one wounded animal gives another across a field, not comfort, just the plain acknowledgement, "Oh, you too." "Sit down," she said. "Ms. Sterling, I have to—" "You have 22 minutes before you have to leave to make it across town by 7:15. I know exactly how long it takes to get anywhere in this city. Sit down. That's not a request from your boss. That's a—" She stopped. Something crossed her face. "I don't actually know what it is. Sit down anyway." And Ryan Carter, who never asked anyone for anything, who had built his whole life around the principle that he would rather sink alone than reach for a hand. Ryan Carter pulled out the chair across from Victoria Sterling and sat down. She didn't say anything for a while. She turned her phone face down on the table, a small deliberate motion, like putting a lid on something. "They think I don't hear it," she said. "The names. The nicknames. The nicknames." A thin, bitter smile. "The dragon. The Ice Queen. My favorite is the one the junior analysts use. They think I don't know, the woman who fired her own heart." She turned the phone over and back again, a nervous motion. "Clever. Cruel. They're not wrong. They're wrong. You've worked here 2 years, Mr. Carter. You've spoken to me a handful of times. What could you possibly—" "I've watched you," Ryan said, and then heard how it sounded and shook his head. "Not like I mean I've paid attention. It's a bad habit. I pay attention to people." He turned his coffee mug a quarter turn on the table. "You come in before the sun. You leave after everybody. You never take a Friday. You've got a corner office with a view of the whole city, and you keep the blinds shut. And about once a month you come in, and you're meaner than usual, and everybody says, 'Watch out, she's in a mood,' and nobody ever not once asks if you're okay." He looked up. "I know what that looks like is all. I've got a pretty good view of it from the inside." Victoria Sterling went very still. "What happened to your wife?" she said. Not gently. Directly. The way one broken person is allowed to ask another. "Cancer. It was fast. 11 weeks from the first appointment to the last one. Emma was 3. Ryan's voice didn't shake. He'd sanded this story down over 4 years until he could say it without falling apart, which was its own kind of terrible. "People tell you it gets easier. It doesn't get easier. You just get stronger, which everybody decides to call easier, because it makes them feel better about not having to think about you anymore." "Yes," Victoria said so quietly he almost missed it. "That's exactly right." And Ryan looked at her. Really looked, and he understood suddenly and completely that they were not talking about his wife anymore. "Who was he?" Ryan said. Victoria's hand tightened around her phone. For a moment, he thought she'd throw him out. He watched her fight it, watched 7 years of walls try to hold, and he watched them lose right there in the ugly light of the executive break room. Because sometimes a person has been carrying something alone for so long that the first time someone offers to help hold it, the whole thing just comes down. "His name," she said, and stopped and started again. "His name was Daniel." She didn't say anything else. Not then. She stood up abruptly and smoothed her jacket with both hands, and the mask came halfway back, but not all the way. Never all the way again, not after this. "You'll want to leave now," she said, "to get your daughter." "Ms. Sterling." "Victoria." She said it looking at the window at her own reflection over the dark city. "In this room at this hour when it's just you can call me Victoria." Ryan stood. He picked up his mug. He got to the door and then he stopped, because there was one more thing, and he was a man who'd learned that you don't leave the important thing unsaid because you never know if you'll get the chance again. He'd learned that in a hospital hallway. He'd learned it the hard way. "The restructuring list," he said. "I'm not asking you to take my name off it. I want to be clear about that. I've never asked anybody for anything in my life, and I'm not going to start by begging my boss for my job in a break room." He took a breath. But I've got a 7-year-old with asthma, and this job is her medicine. So I'm just gonna say whatever the number is that division needs to cut, I can find it for you somewhere that isn't for people's families. Give me a week. I'll find you a better answer than the one finance handed you. That's not begging. That's me doing my job." He nodded once. "Good night, Victoria." And he walked out. He didn't see her face after he said it. If he had, he might have understood sooner what was coming. Because Victoria Sterling stood alone in that break room for a long time after the door closed, and for the first time in 7 years, she pressed the heel of her hand hard against her mouth, and she cried not the furious private tears of the morning, but something older, something she thought she'd used up a long time ago, because Daniel had talked like that. Daniel had been the last person alive who'd looked at her and seen a person instead of a bank account. And she had spent 7 years making absolutely certain no one ever got close enough to do it again. And now some exhausted single father from the 14th floor had walked into her break room and done it in under 20 minutes, and she didn't know whether she wanted to promote him or run for her life. Ryan picked Emma up at 7:16, 1 minute late. He apologized to the teacher twice. "You're weird tonight," Emma announced from the back seat, kicking her heels against the base of her booster. "Your face is doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thinking thing. You always do it when it's about money." She was 7, and she saw everything that was the curse and the miracle of her. "Are we still not moving?" "We're still not moving." He caught her eyes in the mirror. "Emma, I met somebody today. At work." "A friend?" Ryan thought about the woman in the break room. The mask that had cracked. The name Daniel that had cost her so much to say. The look of two people recognizing the same wound across a table. "I don't know what she is yet," he said honestly. "But I think maybe she's as lonely as we used to be." "Used to be?" Emma frowned in the mirror. "Daddy, we're still lonely." And Ryan Carter driving his daughter home through the dark city with his job hanging by a thread, and his wife 4 years in the ground, and $58 going out the door for the medical debt at the end of the month, had to stop at a red light and put his hand over his own mouth so his little girl wouldn't hear the sound he made. Because she was right. She was completely right. And he'd gotten so good at pretending otherwise that he'd almost fooled himself. The next morning there was a note on Ryan's desk. Not an email. A note. Handwritten on the heavy cream-colored stationery that only came from one office in the building, folded once, with his name on the front in a hard, elegant script. His coworkers were already whispering. Grace's eyes were the size of dinner plates. Dev drifted over with a coffee and a look of pure alarm. "Carter," Dev murmured. "Why is there a note from God on your desk? What did you do?" Ryan didn't answer. He picked it up and unfolded it, and there were exactly 2 lines inside. "You said you could find me a better answer. You have until Friday. VSPS. The restructuring is on hold. All 4 names. That's the last favor you'll get without earning it." Ryan read it twice, then a third time. And something happened in his chest that hadn't happened in a long, long time. A loosening, a small hot flood of something he'd almost forgotten the shape of. Not relief. It was bigger than relief. It was the feeling of being seen. "Carter." Dev was still standing there. "Buddy, your hands are shaking." "Yeah," Ryan said. He folded the note back up carefully along its one crease and put it in his shirt pocket over his heart without deciding to. "Yeah, I know." Across the building, up on the 14th floor, behind a door that said Victoria Sterling Chief, Executive Officer. A woman who had not let another human being matter to her in 7 years, sat behind her desk with the blinds for the first time anyone could remember pulled all the way open, letting the morning in, watching the city she owned wake up. And she was thinking about a man who had asked for nothing, and a little girl named Emma with asthma, and the way it had felt for 20 terrible minutes in an ugly break room to say a dead man's name out loud to someone who understood exactly what it cost. She didn't know yet where it was going. Neither of them did. But something had opened. A door that had been locked for a very long time. And doors once opened are very hard to close again, as Victoria Sterling was about to learn in a way she never could have imagined. When the second time she took Ryan Carter's hand, she would not say a word at all. By Thursday night, Ryan Carter had gone through every project budget in the division 3 times, and he had found the answer. It hadn't been easy. He'd stayed at the office until 11 the first night, until Emma's babysitter texted him twice, until the cleaners were vacuuming around his ankles and giving him looks. He'd taken the files home and spread them across the kitchen table after Emma went to bed, and he'd worked by the little light over the stove because it didn't hurt his eyes, the same light he made her breakfast under. He'd filled a legal pad with numbers. He'd crossed most of them out. And somewhere around 2 in the morning on Thursday, sitting there in his undershirt with a cold cup of coffee, he'd found it the thing finance had missed or hadn't wanted to see. The waste wasn't in the people. It was in the vendors. Sterling Holdings was paying 3 different outside contractors for work that overlapped by almost 40%. 2 of the contracts had auto-renewed for 6 years, running without anyone rebidding them. And one of them, Ryan had circled this 3 times and then just stared at it. One of them traced back through 2 shell companies to a name he recognized. Marcus Webb, the finance director. The man with the golf tan and the wet towel handshake who'd told Ryan to go kiss some ring. He was quietly billing the company he was supposed to be protecting through a vendor nobody had looked at in 6 years for a number that came out when Ryan added it all up and checked it again to almost 4 times the entire salary cost of the 4 people on the restructuring list. Ryan had sat at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning and understood that he was holding something dangerous. Now it was Friday 8:40 in the morning, and he was standing outside Victoria Sterling's office with a folder under his arm, and his heart going like a hammer, and her assistant, a severe woman named Diane, who had worked for Victoria for 11 years and guarded her door like a Rottweiler, was looking at him over her glasses. "She's expecting you," Diane said in a tone that made it clear she found this personally baffling. "Go in. Don't waste her time." Ryan went in. Victoria was standing at the window with her back to the door, and the blinds were open again, and the morning light came in around her, so that for a second she was just a silhouette. She didn't turn around. "You found something," she said. "I can hear it in how you're breathing." "I found something." "Sit." He sat. He put the folder on the desk, and then, because there was no soft way to do it, he said, "Before you open that, I need you to understand that I didn't go looking for this. I went looking for a budget number. This is what was underneath the budget number. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, and neither can I, and neither can whoever else you have to tell." He slid it an inch toward her. "I want to keep my job, Victoria, but not this way. Not by handing you a grenade and running. So before you look, you should know it's a grenade." Now she turned. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she came to the desk, and she sat down, and she opened the folder. And Ryan watched Victoria Sterling read. He watched her face because her face was the only thing in the room worth watching. She read the first page, and her expression didn't change. She read the second page, and something tightened at the corner of her mouth. She got to the third page, the page with the shell companies, the page with the name, and she went absolutely completely still. The way a person goes still when the floor they've been standing on turns out to be ice. "Marcus," she said. Flat. No inflection at all. "Marcus," Ryan confirmed. She kept reading. She read all of it every page, and she didn't rush, and she didn't skip. When she was done, she closed the folder and set her hand flat on top of it, and she looked at the wall for a moment, and then she started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was low and dark, and it scared Ryan a little. "Do you know what he said to me?" Victoria said 3 weeks ago. "In this office, he sat in that exact chair you're sitting in, and he told me the division was bloated, and that if I wanted to protect the company I loved so much, I'd have to make some hard choices about, and I quote, the human cost." She laughed again, softer, uglier. "The human cost. And the whole time he was—" She stopped. Her jaw worked. 4 families. He was going to put 4 families on the street to cover his own theft. And he was going to make me sign it so that if it ever came out, my name would be on the paper. Yeah. Ryan said quietly. That's about the size of it. Victoria Sterling stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there for a long moment, with her back to him again, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. It had gone quiet and precise, and very, very cold, and Ryan understood that he was hearing the actual thing. Now. The thing the nicknames were reaching for and missing. Not cruelty. Something much more focused than cruelty. Mr. Carter? Ryan? She turned around. I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about your answer because it matters. Who else knows about this? Nobody. I built it myself. It's not in any system. That legal pad is in my bag, and these are the only copies. Your friend, the analyst, Malhotra. Ryan's stomach dropped a little that she knew Dev's name. Dev doesn't know anything. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anybody. Good. She nodded slowly. That's good. Because if this leaks before I'm ready, Marcus lawyers up the shells get scrubbed and it turns into my word against his in a way that costs me 2 years and a great deal of money, and he probably still walks. But if it stays quiet until Monday. A thin, terrible smile crossed her face. Until Monday when the board meets, and I put this folder on the table in front of 11 people who spent all week telling me I failed at the merger. Then Marcus Webb doesn't just lose his job. He loses everything. She sat back down. She laced her fingers together. I want you to understand what you've done, Ryan. You didn't save your job. You saved something much larger, and you handed it to me at the exact moment I needed it most. I've been the villain in this building story for a week. You just gave me the ending back. Ryan didn't know what to say to that, so he said the thing that was actually on his mind. The 4 names, he said. The restructuring. Gone? Victoria said. Permanently. There's no restructuring. There never needed to be one. The savings Marcus said we needed. She tapped the folder. It was here the whole time, in his pocket. She looked at him. Your friends keep their jobs. You keep yours. That was never really in question after Wednesday, but now it's real, and now it's clean. Ryan let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since 2 a.m. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. You did this. I just get to sign it. And then, unexpectedly, she added quietly, Daniel would have liked you. The name again. Daniel. It landed in the room the way it had in the break room with weight, and this time Ryan didn't step around it. You said his name, Ryan said carefully. Wednesday. In the break room. You said it like it cost you something. Victoria's face did something complicated. She looked down at her hands. It's 9 o'clock on a Friday, and I have a board to prepare for, she said. This isn't the time. Okay? But. She stopped. She looked at the folder. She looked at the window. And then she looked at Ryan Carter, and something in her seemed to make a decision she'd been circling for 2 days. Do you have plans tonight, after your daughter's asleep? Ryan blinked. My babysitter can stay till 9, but that's money's tight. I don't usually. I'll pay the babysitter. I'll pay her for a week. She said it fast and then heard herself, and a flush of something almost like embarrassment crossed her face. The powerful woman fumbling a simple human offer badly out of practice. That came out like a transaction. I don't mean it as a transaction. I mean. She stopped. She started over, and her voice was smaller. I mean, I would like to talk to you somewhere that isn't this building, about Daniel, about things. And I don't have anyone to ask Ryan. That's the truth of it. In 7 years I have built an empire, and I do not have a single person on this earth I could ask to have this conversation with. Except apparently a project manager I've known for 3 days. She laughed, but it broke in the middle. God, that's bleak, isn't it? No, Ryan said. It's not bleak, it's just lonely. I know the difference. I live in the difference. They looked at each other. My place, Victoria said finally. Tonight, 9 o'clock. I'll text you the address. Diane will get your number. She stood, and the mask came back up the CEO, returning the workday, reasserting itself, but she paused at the last second, one hand on the folder. And Ryan. Whatever happens tonight, Whatever I tell you Monday in front of the board, you and I have never had a personal conversation in our lives. Do you understand? For your sake more than mine. If Marcus goes down and it comes out that the man who found the evidence is having dinner at the CEO's apartment, I understand, Ryan said. I've got a kid. I understand better than anybody how it looks. Yes. Something softened in her. I imagine you do. Said. He almost didn't go. He stood in his apartment at 8:30 that night with Emma finally asleep, and the babysitter, Mrs. Okafor, from 2 doors down, settled on the couch with her knitting and a paid week's promise. And Ryan looked at the address on his phone and thought, this is a mistake. She was his boss. She was a billionaire. He was a widower with a kid and $40 in checking until payday, and a wife in the ground, and whatever this was, it could only end in one of 2 ways. Both of them bad. Either it was nothing, in which case he was humiliating himself, or it was something, in which case he was risking the one job that kept his daughter breathing on the whims of a woman the whole building called the Ice Queen. He went anyway. He went because of the way she'd said, I don't have anyone to ask. He went because he knew that sentence from the inside. He went because 4 years ago, he'd stood in a hospital hallway and learned that the things you don't do, the words you don't say, the doors you don't walk through, those are the things that haunt you, not the risks you take. The regrets that had teeth were always the ones about the moments he'd been too scared to move. So he drove across town, and he gave his name to a doorman in a building where the lobby alone was worth more than everything Ryan had ever owned, and he rode a private elevator up and up and up. Victoria opened the door herself. She wasn't in the suit. That was the first thing he noticed, and it did something to him he wasn't prepared for. She was in dark slacks and a soft gray sweater. No shoes, and her hair was down, and without the armor she looked younger and more tired and more real. And Ryan stood in the hallway for a second, just adjusting to it the way your eyes adjust coming out of a dark theater into daylight. You came, she said. She sounded surprised. I genuinely wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. That's honest. You said you wanted honest. I only really know how to do the one thing. She stepped back to let him in, and Ryan walked into the apartment, and he stopped. He'd expected luxury. He'd braced for it, the marble, the art, the cold, expensive perfection that would remind him exactly how far apart their worlds were. And there was some of that, sure, in the bones of the place. But that wasn't what stopped him. What stopped him was that the apartment was empty. Not empty of furniture, empty of life. There were no photographs on the walls, no mail on the counter, no coat thrown over a chair, no shoes by the door but her own, no coffee mug in the sink, no plant, no clutter, no evidence that a human being actually lived here, instead of just sleeping here between the hours she couldn't be at the office. It was the apartment of someone who had stopped years ago expecting anyone to ever come over. It looked, Ryan thought, exactly the way the empty side of his own bed felt. You can say it, Victoria said, watching his face. Everyone thinks it. They just don't come up here to see it. It's not. Ryan stopped. How long have you lived here? 6 years. 6 years? He turned in a slow circle. Victoria. There's nothing here. There's me here. She said it lightly, but it didn't come out light. She moved past him toward the kitchen. I have wine. I actually don't know what I have. I had groceries delivered this afternoon in a small panic because I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had a guest. I bought cheese. I don't even like cheese. I panicked and bought cheese like a person in a movie. She was talking too fast. She stopped herself, gripped the edge of the counter, and laughed at herself, and this time it was real. I'm nervous. Isn't that ridiculous? I sat across from 11 men this morning who wanted my job and I wasn't nervous, and I'm standing in my own kitchen and I'm nervous. I'm nervous too, Ryan said. If it helps? It helps a little. He came and sat at the counter the way Emma sat at his counter every morning, and Victoria poured 2 glasses of wine with hands that weren't quite steady. And for a minute neither of them said anything, and it wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't unbearable either. It was 2 people who'd forgotten how to do this, both remembering at the same time that they'd once known. "Tell me about him," Ryan said, and Victoria Sterling put down her wine and she told him. "His name was Daniel Whitmore," she said, and Ryan's whole body went cold. "Whitmore," he said. "The merger, Whitmore Sterling. The deal that fell through Wednesday was with his family's company, yes." She turned her glass slowly on the counter. "That's the part nobody knows. That's the part that made this week you have no idea, Ryan. When that deal came across my desk 8 months ago and I saw the name Whitmore on it, I nearly threw up in my own boardroom. I pursued it anyway. For 8 months, I sat in rooms with his father and his brothers, and I negotiated, and I smiled, and I pretended I'd never that I didn't." Her voice caught. She pressed on. "And Wednesday it fell apart, and everyone thought I was upset because I lost a merger. I wasn't upset because I lost a merger. I was upset because for 8 months having that deal alive meant I still had a reason to say his family's name out loud. And now I don't. Now it's really over. All of it." Ryan didn't touch his wine, he just listened. "We met when I was 26, she said. "Before the company was anything. Before I was anything. I was working 18-hour days trying to build Sterling out of nothing. And I was so hard. Ryan, even then, I'd already decided the world was a thing you conquered, not a thing you lived in. And Daniel..." She smiled, and it was the first real smile Ryan had ever seen on her, and it transformed her face completely. Daniel thought that was hilarious. He thought I was hilarious. He was the only person who was never once impressed by me, and never once afraid of me, and it made me insane, and then it made me... She stopped. "He used to leave me notes, little ones. I'd find them in my coat pocket in my briefcase folded into my day planner. Just nonsense. 'You forgot to eat lunch, didn't you? The woman at the coffee cart says hi. Stop working, come home, I made the bad pasta you like.'" Her eyes were wet now, but she wasn't fighting it anymore. 7 years and I still find them sometimes. In old coats, in books. I found one last spring in a jacket I hadn't worn since, and I sat on the floor of my closet for 2 hours, Ryan. 2 hours. Reading 4 words in his handwriting. "Or phone mom, Mom." "What did it say?" Ryan asked, softly. "It said, 'Proud of you always.'" Victoria wiped her face with the back of her hand, brusque, almost angry at the tears. "We were engaged. We were going to be married that October. And in July he had a headache that wouldn't go away, and in August they found the tumor, and by the time the leaves changed, he was..." She stopped. She looked at Ryan, and something passed between them, a terrible recognition, because he knew this story. He knew it in his bones. He'd lived the other half of it. 11 weeks, Ryan said quietly. "You said, by the time the leaves changed. How long from the first appointment?" 10 weeks. 10 weeks and 4 days. "Mine was 11 weeks, Ryan said. "First appointment to the funeral. 11 weeks. They sat with that. 2 people who had each been handed by 2 different doctors in 2 different cities, years apart. The exact same impossible arithmetic, the sudden violent shortness of it, the way it doesn't give you time to prepare, the way you're still arguing with the diagnosis when the person's already gone. How did you..." Victoria started and stopped. "You have a daughter. You had to keep going. You had a 3-year-old, and you had to just keep being a person. How..." "I didn't have a choice," Ryan said. "That's the honest answer. That's the whole answer. Emma needed breakfast the next morning. She needed breakfast the morning after the funeral. She didn't understand where Mommy went, and she needed somebody to pour the cereal, and it turned out the somebody was me. And it turned out you can pour cereal while you're falling apart. You can do almost anything while you're falling apart, it turns out. That's the thing nobody tells you. You think grief is going to stop the world, and it doesn't stop anything. The mail comes, the rent's due, the kid needs breakfast." He turned his glass. "You buried yourself in a company. I buried myself in a lunchbox. Same instinct. You just had more money to do it with." Victoria laughed a real startled, wet laugh. "A lunchbox. I make a hell of a lunch. Ask anybody." "I bet you do." She wiped her eyes again. I bet you're a wonderful father, Ryan. That's the thing I keep since Wednesday, since the break room. I keep thinking about it. You've got this. You've got a whole person at home who needs you and depends on you. And I have this. She gestured at the empty, echoing apartment. I have cheese I don't like, and an empire I built so I'd never have to sit alone in a room. And it worked. That's the terrible part. It worked perfectly. I never have to sit alone in a room. There's always a meeting. There's always a crisis. There's always a Marcus Webb trying to rob me. I made myself so busy being feared that I never once had to be lonely. She looked at him. And then you walked into the break room and said, "You look like somebody who could use a worse cup of coffee," and the whole thing just... She stopped. The whole thing just what? Ryan said. Cracked, she said. The whole thing just cracked 3 days ago. And I don't know how to feel about the fact that it took a stranger 20 minutes to do what I've spent 7 years and a great deal of money making sure no one could do. She stood up abruptly and walked a few steps away, arms crossed her back to him. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I don't do this. I want you to know that this isn't a thing I do. I know it's not, Ryan said. How do you know? Because you bought cheese, he said. People who do this all the time don't panic buy cheese. She turned around, and she was almost smiling and almost crying, and she looked at him for a long moment across the empty apartment. You're not what I expected, Ryan Carter, she said. Yeah, well. He gave a small, tired shrug. Nobody ever expects the sad guy from the 14th floor to be much of anything. It's kind of my superpower. Nobody looks twice. I'm looking twice. The words landed in the quiet apartment, and they both heard them land, and something shifted in the air. Not romantic, not yet. It was too raw and too new for that, but something. A door easing open a little further. Two people standing in the wreckage of two identical griefs, discovering that the wreckage had the same floor plan. Ryan set down his wine. Can I tell you something? He said, that I've never told anybody. Victoria came back to the counter. She sat down across from him. She nodded. I'm scared all the time, Ryan said. Not scared of one thing. Scared of everything constantly in the background like a hum. I'm scared of the money running out. I'm scared Emma's going to get really sick and I'm going to be alone in a hospital again. I'm scared she's going to grow up and not remember her mother, and it's going to be my fault for not keeping her alive enough somehow in the stories in the... I don't know. He shook his head. But you want to know the thing I'm most scared of. The one underneath all the others. Tell me. I'm scared of tonight, Ryan said. I'm scared of sitting in a kitchen with somebody who makes me feel like a person again, instead of a machine that pours cereal. Because the last time I let myself feel like a person, I had a whole life and a wife and a future, and then a doctor said 11 weeks and it all just went. And I decided standing in that hallway that I was never going to do that again. I was never going to hand somebody the power to take the floor out from under me. And I've been really good at it, Victoria. 4 years. I've been so careful. His voice roughened. And then some cold billionaire cracks a broken face at me in a break room, and I can't stop thinking about her, and I'm sitting in her kitchen, and I'm so scared I can barely breathe, because I know exactly what it costs when it goes wrong. I've paid it. I can't afford to pay it twice. The apartment was completely silent. Victoria reached across the counter. She didn't take his hand. She just put her hand down on the counter next to his, close, not touching an offer with no pressure in it. I'm scared too, she said. For all the same reasons. I paid it too. I know exactly what it costs. She looked at their two hands inches apart on the cold stone. So maybe we don't do anything about it tonight. Maybe we just say it. Maybe two people who are both that scared just sit in a kitchen and say the true thing out loud, and that's enough for one night. Maybe that's already more than either of us has done in years. And Ryan Carter looked at her hand next to his, and he thought about Emma asleep across town, with Mrs. Okafor knitting on the couch, and he thought about his wife. And he thought about the notes in Daniel's handwriting that Victoria still found in old coats, and he understood that he was sitting across from the only other person he'd ever met who carried the exact same weight he did. He didn't take her hand, but he didn't move his away either. He left it there an inch from hers, And that inch of not moving was the bravest thing Ryan Carter had done in 4 years. "Okay," he said quietly. "Just the true thing. That's enough for tonight." They talked until almost midnight. They talked about the dead, and then slowly they talked about the living, about Emma, about the company, about Daniel's terrible pasta, and Ryan's excellent lunches. Victoria laughed more in those 3 hours than she had in 3 years, and Ryan felt the hum of fear in his chest turn for the first time in longer than he could remember into something else. Not the absence of fear. Something braver than that. Fear with a hand next to it on the counter. At 11:50 he stood to go. Emma. Always Emma. The clock that ran his whole life. Victoria walked him to the door. And there in the doorway, in the empty apartment with no photographs on the walls, she stopped him with a hand on his arm the first time she'd touched him, and she looked up at him. "Monday," she said. "The board?" "Marcus." "I know. We've never met. I understand." "That's not what I was going to say." Her hand tightened on his arm. "I was going to say after Monday. After it's done, and Marcus is gone, and it's safe." She took a breath, and Ryan watched the CEO gather her courage the way lesser people gathered theirs. "After Monday, I'd like to do this again. If you would. This. Talking. The true thing." She almost smiled. "I'll buy better cheese." And Ryan Carter scared widowed $40 in checking a whole life balanced on a job this woman controlled. Heard himself say the thing he'd sworn 4 years ago he would never say again. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." He drove home through the empty midnight city with his hands steady on the wheel and his heart doing something it hadn't done in 4 years. Something that felt dangerous and warm and terrifying and alive. And he did not yet know, could not have known that the safe, simple plan they'd made in that doorway, the plan to talk again after Monday, after it was all handled, after everything was clean and safe, was about to be blown apart on Monday morning before he ever reached the 14th floor by a man with a golf tan who had spent all weekend finding out exactly who had gone digging through his vendor contracts and exactly whose daughter needed her medicine. The call came at 6:52 on Monday morning, 5 minutes before Ryan's alarm, while he was already awake and beating eggs in the little light over the stove. He didn't recognize the number. He almost didn't answer it. But something made him pick up, and a voice he knew smooth, unhurried a golf tan voice said, "Ryan, it's Marcus Webb. I hope it's not too early. I figured a devoted single dad like yourself would be up with the kid." Ryan set down the fork. "Marcus," he said carefully, "it's early." "It is. I apologize. But I wanted to have this conversation before either of us gets to the office man-to-man before things get formal." A pause. Ryan could hear ice clinking in a glass on the other end at 6:52 in the morning. "I understand you've been doing some reading. Vendor contracts. Some very old vendor contracts that nobody's had a reason to look at in years. And I thought before you do anything, you can't take back you and I should talk about your daughter." Everything in Ryan went still. "You want to be real careful," Ryan said low, "about the next thing you say. I'm not threatening your daughter, Ryan. God, what kind of man do you think I am?" Webb laughed, and the laugh was worse than a threat. "I'm concerned about her. There's a difference. See, I did some reading too this weekend. About you. Emma Carter, 7 years old, asthmatic. That's a scary thing, asthma in a kid. And her medication runs through your employer health plan, which runs through a job that last I checked was on a restructuring list I personally recommended." The ice clinked again. "Now that list is on hold. Funny timing. Almost like somebody did somebody a favor. And I got to thinking a job like yours. It's a fragile thing, Ryan. Fragile as a kid's lungs. All it takes is one performance review, one accusation, one HR complaint from a senior director about, say, an employee accessing confidential financial documents he had no authorization to access. Which, by the way, is exactly what you did, isn't it? You weren't authorized to be in those vendor contracts. That's a fireable offense. That's a walk-you-out-by-lunch offense." A pause, letting it land. "So here's my concern for your little girl. If you walk into that boardroom this morning and hand Victoria Sterling whatever it is you think you found, you don't just lose your job. You lose it for cause. No severance. No COBRA. I can't quietly kill. No health plan. And that inhaler, Ryan. The voice went soft, almost gentle, which was the most frightening part. That inhaler gets very, very expensive for a man with $40 in his checking account. Ryan gripped the edge of the counter. How do you know how much is in my checking account? He said. I'm the finance director, son. I know things. A pause. Here's what happens now. You go to the office. You take whatever you found, and you delete it, and you lose the folder. And when Sterling asks you if you found any savings in the division, you tell her no. You look, there's nothing there. We'll have to cut the 4 heads after all. And in exchange, your name comes off that list. I'll see to it personally, and your daughter keeps breathing. Everybody wins. It's just business, Ryan. It's just numbers. You're a numbers guy. You understand. Daddy? Ryan turned. Emma was in the doorway in her dinosaur pajamas, Mr. Buttons under her arm, rubbing one eye. You're doing the face, she said sleepily. The money face. Ryan looked at his daughter, and then he spoke into the phone, and his voice was very calm. Marcus, he said, I'm gonna go make my daughter's breakfast now, and then I'm gonna take her to school, and then I'm gonna come to the office. He paused. You have a good morning. And he hung up. His hands were shaking. He set the phone down carefully so Emma wouldn't see, and he came around the counter and he crouched down to her level. Was that a bad phone call? Emma asked. It was a work phone call, Ryan said. Grown-up money stuff, not your job to worry about, remember? Your face was scared. Ryan looked at her, this small person with her mother's stubborn chin and her mother's way of seeing straight through him, and he thought about Marcus Webb, warm and gentle on the phone at 7 in the morning, threatening a child's lungs over a glass of scotch. And something hardened in Ryan Carter's chest that had never fully hardened before. Not fear, the opposite of fear. Emma, he said, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to remember it your whole life. Okay. She nodded, serious now. Sometimes a person's going to try to scare you into doing the wrong thing. They're going to make it sound smart. They're going to make the right thing sound dangerous and the wrong thing sound easy. And when that happens, he tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. You do the right thing anyway. Even scared. Especially scared. You do it scared. That's what brave actually is. It's not being scared. It's doing the right thing while you're terrified. You understand me? I think so. Good girl. He stood up. Now eat your eggs. We can't be late. He should have called Victoria. He knew that driving to school, then driving to the office. He should have warned her that Marcus knew that Marcus was making calls, that the quiet weekend she'd counted on had not been quiet at all. But every time he reached for the phone, he heard Webb's voice in his head. One accusation, one HR complaint, and he understood with the cold clarity of a man who'd spent 4 years thinking about worst cases that Marcus had spent the whole weekend building his own version of the story, and that in that version, Ryan was a disgruntled employee who'd hacked confidential files, and Victoria was the CEO who'd let him into her apartment on Friday night. If Ryan called her now, and Marcus had her phone monitored, and a man who knew Ryan's checking balance could monitor a phone, then Friday night in that apartment stopped being 2 grieving people and started being evidence. So Ryan didn't call. He did the thing he'd told Emma to do. He walked into the building, and he rode the elevator up, and he did the right thing scared. He went straight to Diane. I need 5 minutes with her before the board, he said. Now, before anyone else gets up here. Diane looked at him over her glasses, and something in his face must have told her this wasn't ordinary, because for once she didn't argue. She's in the boardroom already, prepping. The board convenes at 9. She checked the clock. You have 11 minutes. Go. Ryan pushed through the boardroom doors. Victoria was standing at the head of the long table, with his folder open in front of her, and she looked up, and for a second her whole face opened with something warm. Friday night warm. And then she saw his expression, and it closed into pure alertness. What? She said. What's happened? Marcus called me this morning. 7 a.m. at home. Ryan crossed to the table. He knows Victoria. He knows I went through the vendor contracts. He's had all weekend. He knows how much money's in my checking account. He knows about Emma's asthma. He knows the medication runs through the health plan, and he told me. Ryan's jaw tightened. He told me if I hand you this folder today, he'll have me fired for cause. Unauthorized access to confidential files. No severance, no health plan, and my daughter loses her medicine. That was the pitch. Bury the folder. Tell you I found nothing cut the four heads and Emma keeps breathing. Victoria went white. Then she went very, very still. The same stillness Ryan had seen Friday when she read the name in the folder, the stillness of a person calculating fast under pressure. He's not wrong about the access, she said slowly. Technically. You weren't authorized to be in those contracts. That's real. If he frames it first, if he gets to HR before I do, I know. He'll say you're a disgruntled employee about to be laid off who hacked the finance files to fabricate a smear against the director who recommended the layoff. It's clean. It's plausible. It puts everything you found in doubt because it makes you the criminal. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple. God, he's good. He's had 2 days, and I had a weekend I spent. She stopped. You spent it thinking it was handled, Ryan said quietly. So did I. Their eyes met, and Friday night was in the room with them. For a second, the empty apartment, the 2 hands an inch apart on the counter, the plan they'd made in the doorway. After Monday, after it's safe. And now Monday was here, and it wasn't safe at all. Okay, Victoria said. She straightened. The CEO came fully online, and Ryan watched it happen, watched the fear get folded up and put away somewhere she'd deal with it later. Okay. He thinks he has one move. He thinks the access is his trump card. He doesn't know I already know about it. You told me Friday in this building that you found it accidentally looking for budget savings, which is documented because Diane logged you into my office Friday morning at 8:40 as a project manager delivering a cost reduction analysis I requested. A cold smile. I requested it. There's an email. Thursday. I sent it Thursday night. Ryan blinked. You didn't send me an email Thursday. I sent myself an email Thursday, requesting a division cost analysis from the project management team, authorizing full access to vendor and budget documentation. She held his gaze. Timestamped Thursday 11 p.m. It's been sitting in my sent folder all weekend. I sent it after you left my office Friday. I backdated nothing. Ryan, don't look at me like that. I sent it Thursday night before I ever knew what you'd find because I'm careful, because I've been the villain in enough stories to know you document everything. She almost laughed. I authorized your access before you used it. Marcus's whole trump card is that you were unauthorized. You weren't. I can prove it. Ryan stared at her. You covered me before you even knew you'd need to. I cover everyone who works for me. It's the only decent thing about me. She said it lightly, but it cost her something. Now listen, he'll be here in... She checked the clock. 7 minutes. He'll walk in that door thinking he spent the weekend building a trap, and he'll be watching your face waiting to see if you buried the folder like a scared man protecting his kid. Her eyes sharpened. So here's what we do. We let him think you did. What? When the board convenes, I'm going to open by asking the project management division for its cost reduction findings. That's you. And you're going to stand up in front of 11 people, and Marcus is going to be sitting right there watching, and you're going to say... She leaned forward. Exactly what he told you to say. You're going to say you looked and you found nothing, and the 4 positions will have to be eliminated after all. Victoria. Let him relax, she said. Let him think he won. Let him lean back in that chair with his coffee and his tan, and think he scared the sad single father into folding. And then I take the folder out. Her smile was terrible now, the focused thing under the nicknames finally aimed. And the last face Marcus Webb sees before his whole life ends is yours when he realizes the man he threatened at 7 in the morning was never scared of him at all. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. That's cold, he said. Yes. It's also. He shook his head, something like awe in it. He threatened my kid Victoria. He sat there drinking scotch at 7 in the morning and threatened my 7-year-old's lungs. I'm not going to pretend I want to be gentle about it. Good, Victoria said. Neither do I. Nobody threatens a child in my company and walks out with his dignity. Nobody. And for a second, the CEO and the woman from Friday night were the same person, and Ryan understood that the empire she'd built out of grief had one genuine use, one thing all that cold power was actually good for, and it was this standing between a small girl and the man who'd threatened her. Diane's voice came through the door. They're coming up. 2 minutes. Sit at the far end, Victoria told Ryan fast. Look tired, look beaten. You're good at that. You told me it's your superpower. Nobody looks twice. Use it. Let Marcus look at you and see exactly what he wants to see. She squeezed his arm once, the same place she'd touched him in the doorway Friday night. And Ryan. Whatever he says in that room, however he looks at you, you keep your face still. You've had 4 years of practice keeping your face still. This is what it was for. Ryan went to the far end of the table and sat down, and he put on the face, the tired, beaten, handled-it face, the face that had gotten him through 4 years, and he waited. They filed in at 9 sharp. 11 board members and Marcus Webb among them, and Ryan watched him without watching him. Webb looked rested. He looked like a man who'd had a good weekend and a good breakfast and a productive series of phone calls. He took his seat halfway down the table, and he set down his coffee, and his eyes went straight to the far end, straight to Ryan, and Ryan let him look. Ryan let Marcus Webb see a defeated man. He slumped a little. He didn't meet Webb's eyes for long. He looked down at the table like a man carrying something heavy, and out of the corner of his eye, he watched Marcus Webb see it and understand it and relax. Webb picked up his coffee. He leaned back in his chair. He thought he'd won. Let's begin, Victoria said. She was standing at the head of the table, and she was pure CEO, now cool and precise. No trace of Friday night anywhere on her. Before we discuss the merger post-mortem, I want to close out the restructuring question, because it's been hanging over this division for a week, and the people affected deserve an answer. Marcus, you brought the restructuring recommendation to me 3 weeks ago. 4 senior positions in project management to achieve the cost savings the company needs. Is that still your recommendation? Webb set down his coffee. It is, Victoria, regrettably. I've looked at the numbers every way there is. The savings have to come from somewhere, and that division's the softest target we've got. Nobody wants to cut good people. But that's the job. That's the job, Victoria agreed. Before I sign it, though, I asked the project management team to do their own analysis, to look for the savings somewhere other than 4 families. I want to give them the chance to speak before I put 4 people out of work. She turned to the far end of the table. Mr. Carter, you led that analysis. What did you find? Every head turned to Ryan. Marcus Webb turned too slow and easy, coffee in hand, and there was the smallest smile at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes said, Go on, son. Do the smart thing. Protect your little girl. Ryan looked down at the table. He let the silence stretch. He let Marcus Webb enjoy it. I looked, Ryan said. His voice was quiet, tired, defeated. I went through the whole division budget, every project, every line. And, Victoria said. Ryan lifted his eyes, and he looked at Marcus Webb, and he held it. And I found 4 times the savings we needed, Ryan said, in a single vendor contract routed through 2 shell companies back to a member of this board. The room went dead silent. Marcus Webb's smile did not move for 1 full second. It just stayed on his face, a smile, with nothing behind it, while his brain caught up to what his ears had heard. And then it fell off all at once, and the color went with it. Victoria, Webb said, and his voice had changed. Whatever this employee is about to... Sit down, Marcus, Victoria said without heat, and she opened the folder. You're not finished. You're just going to want to be sitting down for the rest of it. He accessed confidential files. Webb said louder now, half rising, pointing down the table at Ryan. He's not authorized to be anywhere near vendor contracts. This is a disgruntled employee about to be laid off. He fabricated. He was authorized, Victoria said. She slid a printed sheet down the table. By me. Thursday night, 11 p.m. There's the email. I requested a full division cost analysis with complete access to vendor documentation, and I sent it before Mr. Carter opened a single file. So the access is clean. She let that sit. Which means the only question left in this room is why a member of this board has been billing the company he's sworn to protect through 2 shell corporations for 6 years at almost 4 times the salary cost of the 4 people he wanted to fire to hide it. That's those contracts are legitimate vendor relationships. I can explain every... Then explain this one. Victoria slid another page. Meridian Consulting, incorporated by your brother-in-law. Same address as your beach house, Marcus. You used the beach house address. Her voice was almost pitying. 6 years of theft, and you used the beach house address. Ryan found it in an afternoon. Marcus Webb looked down the table at Ryan Carter, and Ryan looked back at him, and he let his tired, beaten face fall away, one piece at a time, until Marcus could see the man who'd been underneath it the whole time, the man who made his daughter breakfast in the little light over the stove, the man who'd told a 7-year-old this morning that brave means doing the right thing scared. You called my house this morning, Ryan said quietly into the silent room so every board member heard it. 7 a.m. You told me if I brought this folder in today, you'd have me fired for cause and cut off my daughter's health insurance. My daughter has asthma, Marcus. You threatened a 7-year-old's medicine over a glass of scotch. He let that land in front of 11 people. You want to talk about a disgruntled employee? I want everybody at this table to know that the finance director of this company called a single father at 7 in the morning and threatened to take away a sick kid's inhaler to cover his own theft. That's the man asking you to believe I fabricated something. The board was staring at Marcus Webb now, all of them. And Ryan watched the thing happen that Victoria had promised. Watched Marcus Webb understand fully. And finally, that the sad man at the end of the table had never been scared of him at all. That the folded, beaten face had been bait. That he'd walked into this room congratulating himself on a trap he'd sprung on no one. Oh, you set me up, Webb said. He was looking at Victoria now, but he pointed at Ryan. The two of you. You, and how long has this been going on? You and a project manager cooking up. Careful, Victoria said, and there was iron in it. Think very carefully about what you're about to accuse me of, Marcus, in a room full of witnesses, when your own signature is on 2 shell corporations. Because I promise you, whatever story you're about to tell to save yourself the beach house address is going to make it very hard for anyone to believe. She closed the folder. You're done. Legal is already on their way up. Diane called them the moment you walked in. You can leave with your dignity, or you can leave with security. Those are the only 2 choices you have left, and they're the last 2 choices I'm ever going to offer you. Marcus Webb stood up slowly. He looked around the table at 11 faces that would not meet his eyes. He looked at Victoria, cold and immovable at the head of the table. And then he looked last at Ryan Carter, at the far end, at the exhausted single father he'd threatened at dawn, who had somehow turned out to be the one who ended him. You should have taken the deal, Webb said low just to Ryan. You had $40 and a sick kid. You should have folded. Any smart man would have folded. Ryan met his eyes. That's the difference between us, Marcus, he said. You think $40 and a sick kid makes a man fold. It's the only thing that ever made me stand up. Marcus Webb had no answer for that. He walked out of the boardroom, and 2 lawyers were waiting for him in the hall, and the door swung shut behind them, and it was over. For a moment, no one in the room spoke. Then one of the older board members, a silver-haired woman named Eleanor, who'd sat on the board since before Victoria took it over, cleared her throat and said to Ryan, Young man, what's your name again? Ryan Carter, Project Management. Well, Mr. Carter. Eleanor looked at him over her glasses, and then she looked at Victoria, and something shrewd and knowing crossed her face, an old woman who'd watched a great many rooms and understood most of what happened in them. "It seems this company owes you rather more than a job." She turned to the table. "I move we table the merger post-mortem. I think we've all had enough excitement for one morning." The board filed out in a low murmur, and a few of them stopped to shake Ryan's hand on the way, and Ryan shook them and said the right things. And then finally, the room was empty, except for the two of them. Victoria at one end and Ryan at the other, the long table between them. Neither of them moved for a moment. "You were incredible," Ryan said quietly. "So were you." Victoria came down the length of the table toward him slowly. "You kept your face still, right up until the end. I've never seen anyone do that to Marcus Webb. I've watched grown men fall apart trying to lie to that man, and you sat there and let him think he'd beaten you, and then you—" She stopped a few feet from him. "He threatened Emma." "Yeah, at 7 in the morning, over scotch." Her jaw was tight. "I want you to know that's over now, not just his job. I'm going to make sure that man, never you and Emma, are never going to have to think about him again. Whatever it takes. That's not the CEO talking." She looked up at him. "That's Friday night. That's the person from Friday night talking." And there it was again in the empty boardroom now, instead of the empty apartment, the thing between them, the door standing open. "Victoria," Ryan said. "This morning before I came in, I told Emma something. I told her brave isn't not being scared. It's doing the right thing while you're terrified." He took a breath. "I've been terrified since Friday. Not of Marcus, of you, of this, of feeling like a person again and knowing what it costs when it goes wrong." He shook his head slowly. "But I stood in that boardroom just now and did the right thing, scared in front of 11 people, because you covered me before you even had to, because you documented an email Thursday night to protect a stranger you'd known 3 days." His voice roughened. "Nobody's covered me in 4 years, Victoria. I've been the one who covers everybody. Emma, my co-workers. And nobody's you sent that email before you knew you'd need it. That's the kindest thing anybody's done for me since my wife died, and I didn't even know it happened until this morning." Victoria's eyes filled. "I told you," she said unsteady. "It's the only decent thing about me. I cover the people who work for me." "No." Ryan closed the last of the distance between them. "That's not what that was, and you know it isn't. You don't send midnight emails backdating authorization for people you don't—" He stopped. He was very close to her now. "Say the true thing. That was the deal. Friday, just the true thing." Victoria Sterling looked up at him, and for a long moment, the mask was entirely permanently gone, and what was left was just a woman who'd built an empire, so she'd never have to sit alone in a room standing 3 days later in an empty boardroom with the first person in 7 years who'd made the empire feel unnecessary. "The true thing," she said barely above a whisper, "is that I have been in love with the idea of a person like you for 7 years, and I convinced myself he didn't exist, and then he walked into my break room and offered me a worse cup of coffee." Her voice broke. "And I am so scared, Ryan. I'm as scared as you are, for all the same reasons. I paid it too, and I don't know if I can afford to pay it twice either. So we do it scared," Ryan said. "Both of us, together, we do the right thing scared." And Victoria Sterling reached up and took his hand the second time. The time the whole story had been building toward. And this time she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She just held his hand in the empty boardroom. The two of them standing in the wreckage of a war they'd won together. Two people who'd each been handed the same impossible 11 weeks years apart, and had somehow impossibly found each other on the other side of it. She held his hand and she didn't let go, and neither did he. And down the hall, security was walking Marcus Webb out of the building for the last time, and up in the boardroom, two terrified, grieving, stubborn people were holding hands and choosing for the first time in years not to run. And neither of them knew that the hardest part was still ahead of them. Waiting at home 7 years old, with her mother's chin, and her mother's way of seeing straight through a person holding a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons, ready to decide whether she would ever let another woman near the only parent she had left. Introducing them was the thing Ryan was most afraid of, and he waited 3 weeks to do it. It wasn't cowardice exactly, though it felt like cowardice at 2 in the morning. It was that he understood something Victoria didn't yet understand, because she'd never had a child, and it was this, that a 7-year-old who had lost her mother would guard the remaining parent with a ferocity that had no bottom to it. Emma had watched people come and go from Ryan's life for 4 years. A work friend here, a neighbor there. Once a woman from church who'd brought casseroles for 2 months, and then stopped calling, and every single time some small part of Emma had braced for the moment the person would take her father's attention, and then take his heart, and then take him and leave her more alone than she'd started. She had learned at 7 to hold her father a little tighter every time a stranger got close. So, Ryan didn't rush it. He and Victoria saw each other in the evenings after Emma was asleep, the way they had that first Friday. Victoria bought better cheese. She learned to sit at Ryan's counter, under the little light over the stove, instead of the big light that hurt his eyes. And she never once asked why they used the small light until one night she did, and Ryan told her, and she was quiet for a long time. And then she said, "You've been living in the dark to save your eyes for 4 years." And Ryan said, something like that. And neither of them was talking about the light. But you can't keep 2 worlds separate forever, and Ryan didn't want to. So on a Saturday in the 4th week over breakfast, he set down the fork and said, "Emma, I want you to meet somebody." Emma looked up from her eggs, instantly wary. "The work friend. Her name's Victoria." "You said her." Emma's fork went still. "The work friend is a lady." "The work friend is the lady," Ryan agreed. "And she's Emma. She's important to me. And I want you to meet her because you're the most important person in my whole life. And I don't do anything important without you." He kept his voice even. "But I need you to know something first. Nobody is ever going to replace your mom. Not ever. Not Victoria, not anybody. Your mom is your mom forever. This isn't about that. Do you understand?" Emma didn't say anything. She looked down at her eggs, and her chin did the thing her mothers used to do, the stubborn set, that meant she was holding something in, and Ryan's heart cracked a little because he knew that look. He'd loved that look on another face a long time ago. "Is she gonna live here?" Emma asked, very small. No. This is just meeting. Lunch. That's all. Nobody's living anywhere." "Is she nice?" Ryan thought about it. He thought about the woman the whole building called the Ice Queen, the Dragon, the woman who fired her own heart. He thought about how she'd covered him before she'd needed to the midnight email, the way she'd stood at the head of a boardroom and ended a man for threatening a child she'd never met. "She's the kind of nice that takes a while to see," Ryan said honestly. "She's had a hard life bug. She lost somebody she loved too, just like us. So she can be a little. She's got walls up, like a castle. And it takes a while to get inside. But once you're inside," he tucked a piece of hair behind Emma's ear. "Once you're inside, she's one of the good ones. I promise you that." Emma considered this with the gravity that only 7-year-olds and Supreme Court justices possess. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll meet her, but I'm bringing Mr. Buttons. And if I don't like her, we leave." "If you don't like her, we leave," Ryan agreed. "Deal. Deal." He picked the restaurant carefully. Not fancy. The last thing he wanted was for Emma to feel small or for Victoria's world to swallow his kid whole on the first day. He picked a diner. A good one with red booths and a milkshake menu and a jukebox that didn't work, but that kids liked to press the buttons on anyway. Neutral ground. A place where a billionaire and a single dad and a 7-year-old with a stuffed rabbit could all three be equally out of their depth. Victoria got there first. Ryan saw her through the window as they walked up, and his heart did something complicated because she'd tried. That was the thing that got him. She'd tried so hard. She wasn't in a suit. She was in jeans. He'd never seen her in. Jeans hadn't known she owned jeans, and a soft blue shirt. And she'd done something different with her hair, and she was sitting in the red booth, looking so profoundly, visibly nervous that Ryan almost laughed. Here was a woman who had faced down hostile boards and hedge funds, and a room full of men who wanted her job, and she was terrified of a 7-year-old. "There she is," Ryan murmured to Emma. "The lady in the blue. That's Victoria." Emma stopped on the sidewalk. She looked through the window at Victoria. She clutched Mr. Buttons to her chest. "She looks scared," Emma said. "She is scared. Of me. Of you." Ryan confirmed. "Very scared of you. You're a very scary person." And something in Emma, some small, watchful, guarded thing, shifted just slightly, because a 7-year-old who has spent 4 years being the one who's scared does not expect to be the scary one. It rearranged something. She looked at the nervous woman in the blue shirt through the diner window, and instead of a threat she saw for just a second something she recognized. They went in. They. Victoria stood up too fast when she saw them, and knocked the table, and made the water glasses jump, and Ryan watched her register that she'd done it, and flush, and it was so unlike the woman at the head of the boardroom that he loved her a little more for it right there. "Hi," Victoria said. To Emma. Not to Ryan. She barely looked at Ryan. She looked right at the little girl with the stuffed rabbit, and she said, "Hi, you must be Emma. I'm Victoria. I've been your dad talks about you all the time. All the time. I feel like I know you already, which is silly because we've never met so." She stopped. She was talking too fast the way she had that first Friday in her kitchen. "Sorry, I'm nervous. I've never done this before. Meeting somebody's meeting you? I've never done this." Emma looked up at her. She held Mr. Buttons a little tighter. "You knocked the table," Emma observed. "I did knock the table." "You made the water jump." "I made the water jump. That's a thing I do when I'm nervous. I knock into things." Victoria sat back down carefully, as if to demonstrate she could sit without causing a disaster. "Your dad says you don't miss anything. I can see that's true. You noticed the water immediately." Emma slid into the booth across from Victoria, and Ryan sat beside his daughter, and for a moment the three of them just looked at each other across the red table. And it was, Ryan thought, one of the most excruciating and beautiful things he'd ever sat through. "Who's that?" Victoria asked, nodding at the rabbit. Carefully, like she knew it mattered. Emma's arms tightened. "Mr. Buttons." "Mr. Buttons?" Victoria nodded seriously. "He looks very well loved. He looks like he's been through a lot." "My mom gave him to me," Emma said. And it came out like a challenge, like a line drawn in the sand, like a test. She said it, and then she watched Victoria's face with an intensity that made Ryan hold his breath, because he knew what his daughter was doing. She was finding out right now in the first 2 minutes whether this woman was going to try to compete with a ghost. And Victoria Sterling, who had lost the love of her own life and understood better than almost anyone alive what it meant to hold on to an object, because a dead person's hands had once held it. Victoria didn't flinch, and she didn't get that bright, false, overwarm voice adults get when they're trying to win a child. She just looked at Mr. Buttons, and then she looked at Emma, and she said quietly, "Then he's the most important thing at this table. More important than anybody. You hold on to him, Emma. Don't you ever let anybody tell you you're too old for the things the people you love gave you." She paused. "I still have a jacket that belonged to somebody I loved. I'm 41 years old, and I keep a jacket in my closet because he wore it, and sometimes I find little notes he left in the pockets, and I read them, and I cry like a baby. So don't let anybody tell you about Mr. Buttons. You keep him forever." The whole diner seemed to go quiet, though. Of course it didn't. The milkshake machine kept whirring, and the jukebox that didn't work sat silent, and somebody's order came up in the kitchen. But at the red booth, something happened. Emma looked at Victoria. Really looked at her, the way Ryan had looked at Victoria that first night in the break room, and some calculation ran behind her 7-year-old eyes, and Ryan watched his daughter revise her entire model of the situation in real time. "You have a Mr. Buttons," Emma said slowly. "A grown-up Mr. Buttons. A jacket, Mr. Buttons." "I have a jacket, Mr. Buttons," Victoria agreed. "That's exactly right. That's a perfect way to put it." Who was he? The person who wore the jacket. "Emma." Ryan started gently. "You don't have to." "It's okay," Victoria said. And then to Emma, with a directness that Ryan realized she was offering the child on purpose, the same directness the child had offered her. His name was Daniel. We were going to get married. And then he got very sick very fast and he died before we could. So I know a little bit I know what it's like when somebody you love is just gone one day. I know it's not fair. I know it doesn't make sense. She turned her water glass slowly. Your dad told me your mom got sick fast too. 11 weeks, Emma said. She said it the way Ryan said it, a fact she'd been handed too young and had learned to carry. That's how long. Daddy says 11 weeks. Mine was 10 weeks and 4 days, Victoria said. And Emma stared at her, and Ryan watched the last of the wall come down in his daughter's face. Because a 7-year-old, who has spent 4 years being the only kid she knows without a mother, had just met a grown-up who spoke the same secret language, the language of the specific number of weeks, the language of fast and unfair and gone one day. That's almost the same, Emma said, wondering. That's almost exactly the same, Victoria said. Does it still hurt? When you're a grown-up, does it stop? And Ryan tensed because this was the question, the real one, the one Emma asked him sometimes at bedtime, that he never knew how to answer, and he did not know what Victoria would say, and he was afraid she'd say the adult thing, the it gets better thing, the lie. Victoria didn't lie. No, she said. It doesn't stop. I'm not going to tell you it stops because you'd know I was lying and I can see you're too smart for that. She leaned forward a little. But it changes. When it's new, it's like a stone you have to carry in both hands all the time. And you can't do anything else because your hands are full of the stone. And then, after a while, a long while, the stone doesn't get smaller, but you get stronger. And one day you notice you're carrying it in one hand. And then, in a pocket. It's still there. You never put it down. But you get to where you can carry it and still do other things. Still laugh. Still eat a milkshake. Still love people. She glanced just briefly at Ryan and then back to Emma. The stone stays. You just get strong enough to carry it and live at the same time. That's the part nobody tells you when you're little. But I think you're old enough to hear it. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she set Mr. Buttons down on the table. Not put away, not hidden, but set down out in the open between all three of them, and she said, I want a chocolate milkshake. And Ryan Carter had to look down at the menu very fast, because his eyes had gone hot, because his daughter setting that rabbit down on the table where a stranger could see it was the single biggest thing she could have done, and Victoria understood it too. He could see her understanding it, and she had the grace not to make a thing of it. Chocolate's the correct answer, Victoria said. Anyone who orders vanilla can't be trusted. That's a rule. That's a rule, Emma said. That's a rule. I make a lot of rules. It's my job. I'm a person who makes rules for a living. She waved the waitress over. 3 chocolate milkshakes, please. And, she looked at Emma. Do we want fries? I feel like fries. Fries, Emma said immediately. Fries, Victoria confirmed to the waitress. A lot of fries. An unreasonable amount of fries. And that was it. That was the moment. Ryan sat in a red booth in a diner and watched the 2 people he cared most about in the world find the one bridge that could hold both their weight. Not milkshakes, not fries, not the nervous over-trying he'd been afraid of, but the stone. The specific number of weeks. The dead they both carried. Emma had spent 4 years being the only person at her lunch table who knew what it was to lose a mother young. And Victoria had spent 7 years being the only person in every boardroom who'd been left at the altar by a tumor, and the 2 of them, the 7-year-old and the billionaire, recognized each other across a diner table, like survivors of the same shipwreck. It didn't all happen at once, of course. Real life doesn't work that way, and Ryan knew better than to expect it to. The diner was a beginning, not an ending. There were hard days after that, days when Emma tested Victoria the way children test the thing they're starting to want, because wanting it made it dangerous. There was a Sunday about a month later when Victoria came over to make dinner. She was a catastrophically bad cook, It turned out the billionaire who could read a balance sheet in the dark could not boil pasta without setting off the smoke alarm, and Emma, in a mood cold and cruel, the way only a wounded child can be, said, "You're not my mom. You can't even cook. My mom could cook," and stormed off to her room. And Ryan started to go after her, furious and heartbroken, and Victoria caught his arm. "Let me," she said quietly. "Please, let me try." "Victoria, I know what she's doing," Victoria said. "She's finding out if I'll leave when she's awful. Everybody's always left when she was awful, or she thinks they have. Let me be the one who doesn't." She squeezed his arm. "I ran an empire for 7 years, so I'd never have to sit in a room with somebody who might reject me. I'm done running from that. Let me go sit in the room." And Ryan, who did not let people take over with Emma, ever let Victoria go down the hall. He didn't hear all of it. He heard Victoria knock, and heard Emma say, "Go away," and heard Victoria not go away. He heard the door open. He heard the low murmur of 2 voices, one small and furious, one careful and steady for a long time. And when Victoria came back out 20 minutes later, her eyes were red, and Emma's hand was in hers, and Emma looked at her father and said in a small, ashamed voice, "I said sorry. Victoria says my mom sounds like she was a really good cook, and she wishes she could have learned from her." Ryan looked at Victoria over his daughter's head. "I told her the truth," Victoria said softly. "I told her I'm not trying to be her mom, that her mom's job is filled forever and I'm not applying for it. I told her I'm applying for a different job that doesn't have a name yet and that I'll take whatever job she's willing to give me, even if it's a small one, even if it starts as just the lady who's bad at pasta." She smiled unsteady. "She's agreed to let me be the lady who's bad at pasta. For now." "For now," Emma confirmed with tremendous dignity. "For now is enough," Ryan said, and his voice wasn't quite steady either. "For now is more than enough." The months turned, the way months do. Fall became winter, became a spring that felt to Ryan like the first spring in 4 years that wasn't just a thing to get through. The stone was still there. Victoria was right. It never got smaller, but Ryan found he was carrying it in a pocket now, most days, instead of in both hands. And he had free hands for the first time in years, and he did not entirely know what to do with them, except reach for the 2 people who had somehow, against everything, become his family, because that's what they became. Slowly, and then all at once, the way these things go. The lady who was bad at pasta got better at pasta and then got a nickname, V. Emma started calling her V, which Victoria received the first time like a woman being handed a medal. V learned that Emma liked the crusts cut off, but only on weekdays, that she was scared of the dark, but would never admit it, that she needed exactly one more chapter than you thought you had time for at bedtime. V started showing up at the things the school play where Emma was tree number 2, the parent-teacher conference where Ryan couldn't get off work in time, and V went in his place and terrified a substitute teacher into raising Emma's participation grade. The flu that swept through in January, where V sat up 2 nights running in a chair by Emma's bed because Ryan had finally, after 4 years, found someone he could split the terror with. And Victoria changed too. The building noticed it first before Ryan fully clocked it himself. The Ice Queen started saying good morning to people. She learned the names of the cleaning staff and then the names of their kids. She kept the blinds open in her office always now, and she left at 6. Most nights actually went home to a life instead of hiding from the lack of one. Diane, her assistant of 11 years, cornered Ryan by the elevators one afternoon and said in a low, fierce voice, "I don't know what you did. I don't want to know. But she smiled at me last week. She asked how my mother was doing. 11 years, Mr. Carter, and she never once knew I had a mother." Diane's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Whatever you did, don't stop." Ryan didn't stop. He watched Victoria's empty apartment fill up slowly with life. A drawing of Emma's on the refrigerator, the first thing that had ever been stuck to that refrigerator. Then a photograph, a real one, framed of the 3 of them at the diner, milkshakes in hand, Mr. Buttons propped on the table. Then Emma's spare toothbrush in the guest bathroom. Then a plant which Victoria killed and replaced and killed again, and finally kept alive on the third try with Emma standing over her, supervising the watering like a tiny stern foreman. And one evening in that first real spring, Victoria took Ryan somewhere she had never taken anyone. She didn't tell him where they were going. She drove. She almost never drove. She had people who drove her, but this time she drove, and Ryan understood that mattered, without knowing why yet. She drove them out of the city north until the buildings gave way, and she pulled into a cemetery, and she parked, and she sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel and didn't move. "I haven't been here in 3 years," she said. "I couldn't. I'd get as far as the gate, and I'd turn around. 3 years." She let out a breath. "I wanted you to be here the first time I could make it past the gate." Ryan didn't say anything. He just took her hand. They walked together across the grass, and Victoria led him to a stone, a simple one, simpler than Ryan would have expected, gray granite with a name and 2 dates, 10 weeks and 4 days too close together. And she stood in front of it, and Ryan stood beside her. And for a long time, neither of them spoke. "Hi, Daniel," Victoria said finally. Her voice was steady, and then it wasn't. "I'm sorry it's been so long. I told myself I was too busy. But the truth is, I couldn't stand to. Because coming here meant it was real, and if I never came, some part of me got to pretend you were just at the office, or traveling, or—" She stopped. She wiped her face. "I built the whole company so I wouldn't have to stand here. Did you know that 7 years, Daniel? $40 billion in market cap. And the whole thing underneath the whole entire thing was just a machine I built, so I'd never have an afternoon free to come stand in front of your stone." She laughed, wet and broken. "You'd have hated it. You'd have left me a note. 'Stop building, come home, this is stupid.' You'd have been right. You were always right about the stupid stuff." Ryan's throat was tight. He almost stepped back to give her privacy, but Victoria's hand tightened on his and held him there. "No," she said. "Stay. I want you here. That's the point. I want—" She turned to him, and her face was wet and open and utterly unguarded. "Daniel, this is Ryan. And his daughter Emma. She's not here. She's 7. She's got a rabbit named Mr. Buttons, and your same laugh actually isn't that strange. She's got your same anyway." She was crying now, but she was smiling too. "I wanted you to meet him, because I know what you'd say. I know exactly what you'd say, because you said it in one of the notes, one of the ones I found. You wrote it right before you got sick, and I found it a year later, and I nearly died reading it. You wrote, 'If anything ever happens to me, don't you dare turn to stone. Promise me you'll let somebody in again. Promise me you won't waste all that love just because I'm not here to catch it.'" Her voice cracked completely. "I broke that promise for 7 years, Daniel. 7 years I turned to stone on purpose just to spite the universe for taking you. And then this tired man walked into a break room and offered me a worse cup of coffee, and She couldn't finish. She pressed her hand to her mouth. And Ryan Carter did the only thing there was to do. He put his arm around her, and he held her up in front of the stone of the man she'd loved. And he said quietly to the granite, to Daniel, to a man he'd never met, "I've got her. I want you to know that. I don't know how this works if you can hear this, but I lost somebody too, so I figure if anybody's listening, it's you." His voice was rough. "I've got her, Daniel. And she's got me. And we've both got a little girl who needs about 4 mothers worth of loving, and we're gonna do our best to be enough. And I'm not trying to be you. Same way she's not trying to be Emma's mom. Those jobs are filled forever. We're just—" He looked at Victoria, and then back at the stone. "We're just 2 people carrying 2 stones, and it turns out you can carry them easier with somebody holding your other hand. That's all this is. That's all it ever needs to be. So thank you. For the note. For telling her not to turn to stone." She listened. It just took her a while. He swallowed hard. "Rest easy, man. We've got it from here." Victoria made a sound against his shoulder, half sob and half laugh, and she reached out and touched the top of the stone the way you'd touch a person's shoulder, and she said, "Proud of you always. Right back at you. Finally, right back at you. They stood there a long time, the two of them in front of the stone, while the light went golden long across the grass. And when they finally walked back to the car, Victoria's hand was in Ryan's, and something in her had changed. Some final knot had come loose, and she drove them home lighter than she'd come. That night back at the apartment that wasn't empty anymore, after Emma was asleep in the guest room, that had somehow become Emma's room, with her drawings on the walls and her spare clothes in the dresser and the third plant. The one that lived on the windowsill. Victoria stood in the kitchen and looked around at all of it, the drawing on the fridge, the framed diner photo, the small chaos of a child's life spreading through the museum-clean apartment she'd hidden in for 6 years, and she said softly to Ryan, "It's not empty anymore?" "No," Ryan said. "It's not. I didn't think it ever would be." She turned to him. "I want you to know that. When you walked in here that first Friday and saw it, I saw your face. You saw exactly what it was. A place a person sleeps so they don't have to admit they don't live anywhere. And I thought, that's it. That's the truth of my whole life, and this stranger just walked in and saw it in 4 seconds." She came to him, and she put her hands on his chest over his heart, where he'd once folded a note along its single crease and carried it all day. "And now there's a child's drawing on my refrigerator, and a rabbit named Mr. Buttons has his own chair at my table, and I killed 2 plants trying to keep the third one alive, and I have never. Ryan, I have never been this happy and this scared at the same time in my entire life." "That's the deal," Ryan said. He put his hands over hers. "Remember, that's always been the deal. Happy and scared at the same time. We do it scared." "We do it scared," Victoria agreed, and she looked up at him, and there was a question in her face, a big one that had been forming for weeks, one Ryan could see her working up the courage to ask, and Ryan felt his own heart start to pound, because he knew what it was. He could feel the shape of it coming, and he found that he wasn't going to run from it either. But she didn't ask it, not that night. She was too smart for that, and too careful with the fragile, enormous thing the three of them had built. She just rose up on her toes and kissed him in the kitchen, that wasn't empty anymore, under the little light over the stove, the small light that didn't hurt his eyes, and Ryan Carter, widower, single father, $40 in checking. Not so long ago, a man who'd sworn in a hospital hallway 4 years ago that he would never hand anyone the power to take the floor out from under him again, kissed her back and did not feel the floor go anywhere at all. For the first time in 4 years, the floor held, and down the hall, a 7-year-old girl slept in a room with her name on it, and her drawings on the wall, and a rabbit her mother gave her, tucked under her chin in an apartment that had learned how to hold a family again, and none of the three of them, not the man or the woman or the child, knew yet that in 1 year, almost to the day, Ryan Carter would stand in the exact hallway where a foolish joke had started all of it, with a ring in his pocket. And every word he was about to say meant completely this time, and no part of it a joke at all. The ring had been in Ryan's pocket for 11 days before he found the courage to use it. He'd bought it with his own money, which mattered to him more than he could explain to anyone. Victoria could have bought a diamond the size of a walnut without noticing the dent in her accounts, and that was exactly why Ryan had spent 6 months quietly setting aside a little from every paycheck, the way he'd once set aside $58 a month for the medical debt, until he had enough for a small, simple, honest ring. A ring a project manager could afford. A ring that said, "I am not marrying you for what you have, because I have some too. And I built it the same way you built yours, a little at a time, scared the whole way." He carried it for 11 days because he wanted the moment to be right, and because every time he thought it was right, he lost his nerve. Because Ryan Carter, who had faced down Marcus Webb in a boardroom without blinking, was terrified of one small question in a way he hadn't been terrified of anything since a doctor said 11 weeks. He told Emma first. Of course he did. He didn't do anything important without her, and he wasn't about to start with this. "Bug," he said the night before, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it like a grown-up, because it's a grown-up-sized question." Emma sat up. She was 8 now, had turned 8 in the fall, a birthday Victoria had thrown in the not-empty apartment with a cake she'd baked herself, and burned slightly, and served anyway, and it had been the best birthday of Emma's life. Is it about V? It's about V. Ryan took a breath. I want to ask V to marry us. To stay. Forever. Officially. I want to ask her to be my wife and to be part of our family for good. Not just for now. For always. He watched his daughter's face carefully. But here's the thing, Emma. I'm not going to do it if you don't want me to. You're my partner. You've been my partner for 4 years, since it was just the two of us pouring cereal. So this is your decision as much as mine. If you say no, I put the ring away and it's just us. And that's a good life too. That's a great life, and I will never once make you feel bad about it. So tell me the truth. Do you want V to stay forever? Emma was quiet for a long moment. She reached over and picked up Mr. Buttons from the pillow, and she held him, and Ryan weighted his heart in his throat. When Mom died, Emma said slowly, I thought our family got broke, like a plate. And you can glue a plate, but everybody can still see the crack. She looked up at him. But V didn't glue us. It's like we were a family, with an empty chair, and she didn't try to sit in Mom's chair. She brought her own chair. Emma frowned, working it out, 8 years old, and reaching for something enormous. She brought her own chair, and she put it at the table, and now there's more chairs than there used to be, not less. That's better. More chairs is better than an empty one. Ryan couldn't speak for a second. More chairs is better than an empty one, he repeated when he could. Emma, that might be the smartest thing anybody's ever said. So yes, Emma said. Ask her. But she held up a finger, her mother's finger, that stubborn 7 going on 40 gesture. I want to help. I want to be there. And Mr. Buttons wants to be there. And I get to be the one who tells her about the chairs. You get to be the one who tells her about the chairs. Ryan agreed, and he pulled his daughter into a hug so she wouldn't see his face. And Emma let him, and patted his back the way he'd patted hers 1,000 times, and said, It's okay, Daddy. It's a happy one. This is a happy cry. Yeah, Ryan said into her hair. Yeah, Bug, this is a happy one. He did it where it started. He'd thought about it for 11 days. All the fancy places he could take her, all the ways a man was supposed to do this. The restaurant, the view, the violinist. All the things Victoria's money could have bought, and that would have meant nothing, because they weren't theirs. And in the end, he knew there was only one right place. The same way he'd known there was only one right diner a year before. He brought her back to the building. To Sterling Holdings. To the 14th floor. To the hallway. He told her he'd forgotten something at the office on a Saturday, and she came with him, because they did everything together now. And Emma came too, holding Mr. Buttons, vibrating with the effort of keeping the secret. And Ryan led them down the empty Saturday hallway, past the break room, where a broken woman had once been offered a worse cup of coffee, and he stopped at the spot. The exact spot he'd walked it out. He knew where it was, where a year and some months ago, he'd made a foolish joke to a woman he was afraid of. Ryan, Victoria said. What are we? Do you know where we're standing? Ryan asked. Victoria looked around. And Ryan watched her, watched the recognition move across her face, watched her understand which hallway this was, which floor, which spot. This is where, she started. This is where I made the worst joke of my life, Ryan said. You remember it. A stressful company event, and you were sitting alone, and everybody in the building thought you were a dragon, and I was too tired to know better, and I said... His voice caught, and he pushed through it. I said, maybe you should just marry me, then nobody would dare pressure you again. You remember. I remember every word, Victoria said. She'd gone very still. I remember I stood up and I don't know what I almost did. I couldn't speak. You were the first person in 7 years who'd offered me something without wanting anything back, and it broke something open in me, and I didn't have the words, so You took my hand, Ryan said, and you didn't say anything. And that scared the hell out of me because I didn't understand yet that a person can say the biggest thing there is without any words at all. He reached into his pocket. So here's what I finally understand more than a year later, standing in the exact same spot. That day, I asked you to marry me, and I was joking. I was hiding behind a joke, the way I hide behind everything, because I was too scared to want anything real. He got down on one knee there on the industrial carpet of the 14th floor hallway, and Emma made a small sound and clapped both hands over her mouth, and Victoria's eyes flooded. But this time, Ryan held up the small, honest, hard-won ring. This time, I mean every single word. No joke. No hiding. Marry me. Marry us. Not because you're lonely. Not because I'm lonely. Not because either of us needs saving anymore. Because we don't. We did the saving. We did it together in a boardroom in a diner and in front of a stone in a cemetery. His voice broke all the way open now, and he let it. Marry me because you brought your own chair to the table. Emma says, he laughed wet. Emma says more chairs is better than an empty one, and she's the smartest person I know, and she wants to be the one to tell you about the chairs, so. He looked at his daughter, and Emma stepped forward holding Mr. Buttons, and she looked up at Victoria, at the lady who'd been bad at pasta, and gotten better, who'd killed 2 plants, and saved the 3rd, who'd sat up 2 nights by a sick child's bed, who'd stood at the head of a boardroom and ended a man for threatening a little girl she'd never met. And Emma said in a clear, brave 8-year-old voice, when Mom died, our table had an empty chair and it made everything sad. But you didn't try to sit in Mom's chair. You brought your own. And now we have more chairs than we used to, and Daddy laughs again, and I'm not scared anymore that people are going to leave because you never left, not even the time I was awful and said you couldn't cook. She took a shaky breath. So will you please stay forever and be part of our family? Me and Mr. Buttons want you to, and Daddy wants you to. And her chin did the thing, the stubborn thing, the thing that came down through a mother she barely remembered. And I think Mom would want you to too, because Mom would want Daddy to laugh. Everybody who loved somebody wants them to laugh again, even the ones who aren't here, especially them. And Victoria Sterling, the Ice Queen, the dragon, the woman who fired her own heart, the billionaire who'd built an empire, so she'd never have to sit alone in a room, sank down onto her knees on the industrial carpet of her own building, right there in front of the man and the child. So she was level with both of them. So Emma didn't have to look up, and she was crying so hard she could barely get the words out. Yes, she said. Yes, God, yes. To both of you. To all 3 of you, you and your dad and Mr. Buttons. Yes, I'll stay. I'll stay forever. I'll bring my chair, and I'll never take it away. I promise, I promise. She pulled Emma into her arms, and then she reached out and grabbed Ryan's hand and pulled him in too, and the 3 of them knelt there tangled together on the floor of the 14th floor hallway, in the exact spot where a joke had once cracked a door open, and they held on to each other and cried the happy kind of crying, the kind Emma had promised her father was coming. You listened, Ryan said into Victoria's hair, to Daniel's note. You didn't turn to stone. It took me 7 years and a worse cup of coffee, Victoria said, laughing and sobbing at once. But I finally listened. I finally let somebody in. She pulled back and looked at Emma, and then at Ryan, and she pressed the small, honest ring onto her own finger with shaking hands, because Ryan was crying too hard to do it. And she held it up to the fluorescent hallway light, and she said, It's perfect. It's the most perfect ring I've ever seen. You bought this yourself, didn't you? Every dollar. Every dollar, Ryan said. $58 a month, near enough. Same as... He stopped. Same as the medical debt, Victoria said softly. She understood. She always understood. You paid off the last of the debt, and then you started saving for this. You turned the thing that was breaking you into the thing that... Yeah, Ryan said. Then it's the most expensive ring in the world, Victoria said fiercely. It cost you everything, and it cost you nothing you couldn't give, and I will never take it off. Never. Do you hear me? They'll bury me in this ring. Don't talk about burying, Emma said sternly, wiping her nose on Mr. Buttons. This is a happy one. And all 3 of them laughed, kneeling on the floor, and it echoed down the empty Saturday hallway of Sterling Holdings, the sound of a family that had built itself out of 2 shipwrecks and a stubborn 8-year-old laughing in the exact place where all of it began. Sudden. They were married in the spring, in a small ceremony that Victoria could have made enormous and chose to make tiny instead. Diane cried through the whole thing. Dev Malhotra was Ryan's best man and gave a toast about a note left on a desk that had 2 lines and changed everything. And only Ryan and Victoria knew what he meant, and they held hands under the table and let him keep the mystery. Emma was the flower girl, and she carried Mr. Buttons down the aisle along with the flowers, because some things you don't leave behind, some things you carry forever. And by now, everyone who loved them understood exactly why. Grace, the young analyst, Ryan had once stayed late to help, came up to him at the reception with tears in her eyes and said, "You stayed 20 minutes late to fix my formatting when your whole life was falling apart and you never said a word about it. I just want you to know I saw it. Everybody who ever met you saw it. That's why this—" She gestured at the whole happy room. "That's why nobody's surprised. The only person who was ever surprised you deserved this was you." Ryan didn't have an answer for that. He just hugged her and thanked her and went to find his wife. His wife. It took him months to stop feeling the small electric shock of the word. They kept the not empty apartment, and it got less empty every year. The refrigerator filled up with drawings, and then with report cards. And then as Emma got older, with concert flyers and dance recital programs, and eventually, impossibly, a learner's permit photo that made Ryan sit down hard on a kitchen stool and put his face in his hands. Not sad, just overwhelmed by the sheer forward motion of a life he'd once been certain had stopped forever in a hospital hallway. Victoria changed the company too. She started a foundation quietly, the way she did the real things for families facing what she and Ryan had each faced. The fast diagnoses, the 11 weeks, the 10 weeks, and 4 days, the impossible arithmetic. She funded a program that covered medications for kids whose parents were between jobs, or between insurance, or between disasters. Kids like a 7-year-old with asthma whose father once had $40 in checking and a monster on the phone at 7 in the morning. She never named it after herself. She named it after Daniel. And on the day it opened, she and Ryan and Emma stood together at the front of a room full of families who would never know how close their own children had once come to falling through the cracks. And Victoria said in front of all of them that she'd built one empire out of grief, and she was done with that one, and she was going to spend the rest of her life building a smaller, better thing out of love instead, and that she'd learned the difference from a tired man who offered her a worse cup of coffee on the worst night of her year. Marcus Webb, for the record, never worked in finance again. The shell companies unraveled exactly the way Victoria had promised they would, and the beach house was sold to pay back a fraction of what he'd taken, and he faded out of their lives entirely. A small cold footnote in a story that turned out not to be about him at all. Emma asked about him exactly once, years later, having half overheard the tale, and Ryan told her the truth, that a man had once tried to scare him into doing the wrong thing by threatening the person he loved most in the world, and that he'd done the right thing scared, and that she'd been the reason he could. "You did the right thing scared," Emma said. "Like you told me, in the kitchen, with the eggs. You remember that?" "I remember everything," Emma said, which was true and was her mother's gift, both her mother's gift, the watchful girl who never missed a thing. Years later, when Emma was grown and gone off to build her own life, and the apartment was quieter, but never empty, never that particular terrible empty again, people would sometimes ask Victoria the question. At galas, at foundation dinners in the profiles, they wrote about her now that she'd become known for the softer things instead of the fearsome ones. They'd ask how it happened, how the coldest CEO in the city, the woman who'd frozen out the world for 7 years, had ended up married to a project manager with a daughter and a rescued family, and a small, honest ring she still wore and still decades on refused to take off. And Victoria always gave the same answer. "He didn't break down my walls," she'd say. Everyone thinks that's the story, that some man came along and knocked down the fortress. That's not what happened. My walls were mine. I built them for a reason, out of a real grief, and nobody had the right to knock them down, and nobody could have. She'd smile the real smile, the one that transformed her face, the one only 3 people had ever gotten to see in the early days. He just sat outside the wall, and he waited, and he didn't want anything from me, and every day he was still there. He offered me a worse cup of coffee, and he never asked for the good one back. And one day I realized I'd been the one holding the door shut the whole time from the inside, and that all I had to do was let go of it. He didn't break down my walls. He just stayed long enough that I trusted him enough to open the door myself. And Ryan, if he was in the room, would smile at that because he knew the deeper truth, the one underneath even that one. The deeper truth was that they'd saved each other, and neither one had done the saving. Two people carrying two identical stones had found each other in the exact center of the same wilderness, and had discovered that a stone is lighter with someone holding your other hand, and that a table with more chairs is better than a table with an empty one, and that the bravest thing a frightened person can do is not to stop being frightened, but to reach out anyway, scared, and stay. He'd lost a wife, and grief had not stopped the mail, or the rent, or the breakfast, and he'd learned to pour cereal while falling apart, and he'd promised his daughter they weren't moving, and he'd made the promise come true. She'd lost the love of her life 10 weeks and 4 days after a headache that wouldn't go away. And she'd built $40 billion of armor and one empty apartment, and she'd found notes in old coats for 7 years and broken a dead man's dying wish every single day until a tired stranger walked into a break room and offered her the smallest, truest kindness she'd been shown in years. The greatest thing Ryan Carter ever built was never the career, and Victoria Sterling knew the greatest thing she ever built was never the company. The greatest thing either of them ever built was the family they'd been certain they would never have again, assembled out of wreckage held together by a stubborn child and a rabbit named Mr. Buttons and a ring that cost $58 a month and everything a scared man had left to give. Two broken people didn't need someone to fix them. They just needed someone who would stay. And they stayed. Both of them, all of them, for the rest of their lives, they stayed.